Clyde Barrow, the most ruthless killer the Southwest has ever known.
I was forced along on the threat of death with Clyde Barrow through many of his gun battles.
The year is 1934. America is drowning in the Great Depression. Banks have failed, farms lie barren, and hope is a luxury few can afford. Yet amid this despair, two names ignite the public imagination: Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. For 21 months, this young couple and their rotating gang of misfits terrorized the Southwest, leaving a trail of stolen cars, robbed gas stations, and bloodshed in their wake. They were not masterminds. They were not revolutionaries, but Bonnie and Clyde became legends, a twisted symbol of rebellion in a broken world. Today, their story is often romanticized: the glamorous outlaws, the lovers on the run, the rebels who defied the system. But the truth is far darker.
After Clyde had become a full-fledged killer and gone in for big-time crime, he met Bonnie Parker, waitress.
At least 13 people died at their hands, including lawmen, bystanders, and even former allies. Their crimes were messy, impulsive, and fueled by desperation. Yet their myth persists, a blend of fact and fiction that raises unsettling questions. What turns ordinary people into killers? How does trauma warp the soul? And why does society cling to the allure of the outlaw? This is not a love story. This is a story of violence, trauma, and the making of American infamy. From the dusty backroads of Texas to the bloody ambush in Louisiana, we trace the rise and fall of Bonnie and Clyde, and the shadows they cast over history. Criminological background: roots of rebellion. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born in 1909 into a family of sharecroppers in Tellico, Texas, a world of dirt floors and backbreaking labor. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker entered the world a year later in Rowena, a small town where poverty was a constant companion. By the time they met in 1930, both had already tasted hardship. Clyde had dropped out of school at 12, drifted into petty theft, and served time in Texas's notorious Eastham prison farm. Bonnie, a bright student and aspiring poet, worked as a waitress, dreaming of a life beyond her stifling surroundings. The Great Depression did not create Bonnie and Clyde, but it shaped them. By 1931, unemployment had reached 25%, banks foreclosed on farms, and families starved. In this climate, crime became a twisted form of survival. Clyde's early arrests were for burglary and car theft, crimes of opportunity. But prison changed him. At Eastham, he endured beatings, forced labor, and sexual assault. When he escaped in 1932, he vowed never to return, even if it meant murder. His first kill came weeks later during a botched robbery in Hillsborough, Texas, a moment that marked his irreversible descent. Bonnie's path was less calculated. She joined Clyde not out of greed, but infatuation. Their early crimes were amateurish, robbing a hardware store for $28, hijacking cars that later broke down. But by 1933, the Barrow Gang, a rotating cast of drifters and family members, had escalated to bank robberies and shootouts. Their targets were small rural institutions, a detail that resonated with a public who saw bankers as villains. Yet unlike folk heroes, Bonnie and Clyde kept every penny. Their rebellion was personal, not political. A fire lit by trauma and stoked by pride. Psychological background: the mind of the outlaw. To understand Bonnie and Clyde, we must confront the psychology of their bond. Clyde Barrow was a product of systemic abuse. Prison records describe him as volatile and reckless, with a pathological hatred of authority. Psychologists today might diagnose antisocial personality disorder, a lack of empathy, a penchant for manipulation, and a thrill-seeking disregard for consequences. But Clyde was also deeply loyal to his family, smuggling guns to his brother in prison, and risking capture to visit his mother. Bonnie Parker is harder to define. She never fired a gun during their early crimes, and a 1933 car accident left her severely burned, requiring Clyde to carry her. Yet she stayed. Was it love, fear, or a craving for the fame her poems courted? In The Trail's End, She wrote, "Someday they'll go down together. They'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde." Her words romanticized their fate, blurring the line between reality and fantasy. Their relationship was codependent, a feedback loop, adrenaline and desperation. Clyde needed Bonnie to validate his self-image as an outlaw king. Bonnie needed Clyde to escape her mundane existence. Letters they left behind reveal a perverse tenderness. Clyde wrote to his mother, I'm not crazy about killing, but if a man needs killing, I'll kill him." Bonnie, in a final poem, admitted, "We're mindless, we're heartless, we'll never be free." Together, they became a single entity, a runaway train with no brakes. The biographer's lens, separating myth from reality. The myth of Bonnie and Clyde was crafted as much by the media as by the duo themselves. Newspapers, desperate for sales, sensationalized their spree. Bonnie was falsely portrayed as a cigar-chomping sharpshooter. Clyde was dubbed public enemy number one, though the FBI never formally granted him the title. In reality, the gang's incompetence was staggering. They got lost during getaways. They robbed gas stations for pocket change. They bickered over directions. Biographers note that Bonnie and Clyde were obsessed with their image. They posed for photos with stolen cars and guns, mailing the prints to newspapers. Bonnie's poems were deliberate propaganda, casting them as tragic figures. Even their fashion choices, Bonnie's berets, Clyde's tailored suits, were calculated. As historian Jeff Gwynne notes, they wanted to be famous, not rich, and in the end, they got their wish. But the reality was grim. Gang members like W.D. Jones later confessed they lived in constant terror of the law, of Clyde's temper, and of their own inevitable end. Jones claimed Clyde once shot a sheriff's deputy just to watch him die. Bonnie, hobbled by her injuries, grew disillusioned. In a letter to her mother, she wrote, "I'm so tired of running, but there's no way out but one." That way out would come on a quiet Louisiana road in May 1934. Police investigation, the bloody trail. Law enforcement struggled to keep pace with the Barrow gang. Jurisdictional boundaries hampered coordination. By the time local sheriffs organized posses, Bonnie and Clyde were already across state lines. Their stolen Ford V8s, the fastest cars of the era, outran everything. But after the 1933 massacre in Joplin, Missouri, where 2 officers were killed, the hunt intensified. The tide turned when former Texas Ranger Frank Hamer was hired. A meticulous tracker, Hamer spent months studying Clyde's patterns, his reliance on back roads, his habit of visiting family, his obsession with Ford V8s. Hamer's breakthrough came with Henry Methvin, a gang member whose parents lived in Louisiana. Methvin, seeking a plea deal, agreed to lure Bonnie and Clyde into an ambush. On May 23, 1934, Hamer and 6 officers hid near Sales, Louisiana, armed with Browning automatic rifles, military-grade weapons chosen to ensure no escape. When Clyde's car appeared, the officers opened fire. Over 130 rounds pierced the vehicle, killing Bonnie and Clyde instantly. The brutality of the ambush sparked debate. Was this justice or vengeance? Hamer defended his actions, stating, "I hate to bust the cap on a woman, but after the things she'd done, she needed killing." The public, however, reveled in the carnage. Crowds flocked to the scene, dipping handkerchiefs in the couple's blood as macabre souvenirs. The aftermath. There were no trials, no juries, no last words. Bonnie and Clyde's bodies were paraded through towns, displayed in funeral homes like carnival attractions. Newspapers published graphic photos of their corpses. Over 20,000 people attended Bonnie's funeral. For many, their deaths symbolized a victory for order. For others, it felt like a loss, the extinguishing of a spark that defied a broken world. Henry Methvin, the betrayer, was convicted of murder but paroled in 1942. Clyde's brother, Buck, who joined the gang briefly, died in a shootout. Raymond Hamilton, another member, was executed in 1935. The law moved on, but questions lingered. Had Frank Hamer acted ethically? Was the ambush a lawful use of force, or a bypass of justice? Legal scholars note that Hamer's posse had no jurisdiction in Louisiana and no warrant for Bonnie's arrest. Yet in 1934, few cared. The ends justified the means. Bonnie's mother, Emma Parker, spent her life defending her daughter. She wasn't a killer, she insisted. She was just in love. Clyde's family, too, clung to fragments of humanity beneath the myth. But the damage was done. Bonnie and Clyde's story became a cautionary tale and a perverse blueprint for future outlaws. Conclusion: the legacy of blood. Bonnie and Clyde have been dead for 90 years, but their legend thrives. Arthur Penn's 1967 film painted them as glamorous rebels, igniting a new wave of fascination. True crime podcasts dissect their every move. Tourists leave flowers on their graves. Yet this enduring obsession raises uneasy questions. Why do we romanticize killers? Is it the thrill of the forbidden? The illusion of freedom? Perhaps their story resonates because it reflects our darkest contradictions. Bonnie and Clyde were both victims and victimizers, products of a society that failed them and architects of their own destruction. They dared to reject the rules, to live and die on their own terms. But their freedom was a prison of paranoia and bloodshed. In the end, Bonnie and Clyde's greatest theft was not money, but immortality. They understood the power of image, of story, of myth, and in a nation built on reinvention, their tale endures. A reminder that the line between hero and villain is often written by the winners and blurred by time. They sought fame and found infamy. They craved freedom and found a grave. Bonnie and Clyde, forever young, forever damned, forever etched into the dark heart of American history.